They thought it'd be funny, asking a legendary actor to sing at a celebrity talent show, just to watch him fumble. Cameras were ready. Laughter was loaded. But when Denzel Washington took the stage, something no one expected happened. A voice broke through the silence that silenced them all, and revealed a truth he'd kept hidden for decades. What if the greatest performance of his life wasn't in a movie, but in that moment? It was supposed to be a night of light-hearted entertainment. Hollywood's elite gathered at the Beverly Hills Grand Ballroom for a celebrity charity talent show. Gold-draped tables, champagne flutes glittering in the stage lights, and A-list stars seated shoulder to shoulder. But under the surface of the glamour, there was a simmering game of status and ego. Denzel Washington had been invited, of course. His presence alone gave the event legitimacy. But what he didn't know was that he had also been slated to perform. And not just perform, be the punchline. The evening's host, Chase Huxley, a popular late-night comedian known for his biting humor, grinned like a cat with a secret as he clinked a glass to quiet the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, drawing out the pause, "we have a special treat. Our very own Academy Award-winning icon, Mr. Denzel Washington, will now bless us with his hidden talent, singing." The room burst into laughter, not malicious, not yet, but the kind of laughter that bubbles up when people expect a mess. Denzel, seated at a central table, blinked once, then twice, registering the surprise as heads turned toward him. The lights shifted, landing directly on his face. His expression didn't change.
No frown. No smile.
Just a long, unreadable stare at Chase. Chase added, "Come on, Denzel, don't make us beg. I hear you've got pipes." The crowd cheered, fueled by wine and expectation, some already raising phones, ready to catch the moment the usually composed actor squirmed on stage. Everyone assumed he'd politely decline, maybe joke his way out of it. But instead, Denzel rose slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate calm. The applause grew louder, more amused than excited. As he made his way up the short stairs to the stage, the spotlight followed, and Chase backed up, extending the microphone like he was handing over ticking bomb. "Knock us out, big guy," he chuckled. Denzel took the mic without a word and nodded to the house pianist. "Something soulful," he said, his voice low. "Something from Sam Cooke." The pianist blinked, then started the intro to A Change Is Gonna Come. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore, they were waiting, unsure. Denzel stood motionless, head bowed slightly, his silhouette sharp under the light. 30 seconds passed. He didn't sing. Someone snorted. A few giggles rose. But then he lifted his head. His eyes locked on something no one could see. And when the first note came, it wasn't awkward. It wasn't funny. It was raw, deep, shocking. And the room went dead quiet. Long before the bright lights, before the red carpets and gold statues, Denzel Washington was just a boy growing up in the Bronx, where his dreams were shaped not by cameras but by the pulpit. His father, Reverend Denzel H. Washington Sr., was a preacher with a voice that could quiet storms and fill hearts. Their home was modest, lined with books and cracked linoleum, but it was filled with music. Raw gospel hymns, soulful melodies that rose from worn-out vinyls spinning on an old player in the corner. On Sunday mornings, the church would swell with sound, the organ humming like a train, and Denzel's father would lead with a voice so powerful it made grown men cry. That was the first voice Denzel ever fell in love with. As a kid, he'd sneak into the church on Saturdays when no one was there and stand behind the podium, pretending to be both preacher and choir, singing into the empty pews as if they were packed. He never told his friends about those moments. They wouldn't have understood. And by the time he was a teenager, that boy who loved singing quietly faded into the background as he became the tough, smart kid who could hold his own in any room. But the voice never left. In high school, a drama teacher noticed something different in Denzel. Not just his ability to memorize lines, but his emotional control, the way he could hold a pause like a note. She cast him in a school play, and though it wasn't a musical, she asked if he could sing something for the final scene. He chose a piece his father used to sing, and when the curtain fell, the room was still. The teacher wept. That moment stayed with him, not because of the applause, but because for the first time, he'd found a bridge between who he was and who he might become. But life moved quickly. College, then acting school. The roles came, first small, then bigger. The singing. That stayed behind, tucked away in quiet moments in the car, in hotel rooms on lonely shoots, in humming fragments between takes. It became a secret joy, something personal. Something sacred. Even his closest friends in Hollywood had never heard him sing. Not really. It wasn't something he advertised. He was known for strength, for control, for presence, not vulnerability. Singing, to him, was too close to the bone. He remembered once, early in his career, when a director casually asked him if he'd ever considered doing musical theater. Denzel laughed it off, shrugging, saying he didn't think people would take him seriously if he did. The director nodded, but later, Denzel caught him whispering to a colleague, "Yeah, I figured. That's not really his thing." That one comment stuck. Not because it was mean, but because it was wrong. He wanted to tell them that singing had once been everything to him. That before he knew how to act, he knew how to hold a note. But he stayed quiet. That was always easier. Over the years, he sang only for himself. At home. Alone. Gospel mostly, sometimes blues. He kept a small keyboard in his study, hidden behind bookshelves, where he'd sit late at night with headphones on, playing quietly, the way other people pray. His wife once overheard him and asked, "Why don't you ever let anyone hear that?" He smiled and said, "Some things aren't for show." She didn't press. But when he stood on that stage, the piano behind him playing the slow opening of A Change Is Gonna Come, all those memories came rushing back. His father's voice. The school play. The teacher's tears. That director's comment. The silent nights at his keyboard. It all stirred something deep. He wasn't just preparing to sing. He was remembering who he was before the world decided for him. And that night, in front of all those eyes expecting a joke, he wasn't going to perform. He was going to reclaim something. Not for the crowd. Not even for his legacy. But for the little boy who used to sing to empty pews in a cold church on Saturday afternoons, believing that one day, someone might really listen. The evening had all the sparkle of a Hollywood gala. Blinding lights, designer gowns, and the kind of small talk that drips with hidden motives. But beneath the glamour, whispers were already spreading like perfume through the ballroom. Word had it that tonight's big moment wasn't going to be a duet, a comic sketch, or a magic trick. No, the real event was something unexpected. Denzel Washington, the serious actor, the heavyweight of cinema, was going to sing. Some guests thought it was a joke when they first heard it, a playful rumor meant to amuse. But as more people checked their programs and saw his name listed as surprise musical guest, smirks spread like wildfire. People didn't come to see Denzel sing. They came to see him be uncomfortable. A few even started timing their phone recordings in advance, planning to post clips with captions like "Oscar winner tries karaoke." In the shadows of the stage wings, Chase Huxley, the host, chuckled to himself while sipping on his third whiskey sour. He had been waiting all night for this exact moment. In his eyes, Denzel was the kind of guy who walked too tall, too perfect, too untouchable. Bringing him down a notch in front of an audience that large. That was gold. It hadn't been hard to set up either. All it took was a phone call to Denzel's agent, a couple of flattering lines about honoring legends, and a chance to show his fun side. The trap was laid smoothly. Chase rehearsed the intro with extra punch, crafting it not as an insult, but as an opportunity masked in praise. He even went so far as to call it a gift to the crowd. He didn't expect Denzel to take the stage. He expected a laugh, a polite decline, maybe a wink. But when Denzel walked up and took the mic with calm eyes and a nod toward the pianist, something shifted. Chase didn't like it. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. The audience quieted not out of respect, but out of curiosity. Most were expecting a playful tune, something to laugh along with. But Denzel's choice, "A Change Is Gonna Come," wasn't funny. It was heavy, historic, painful. The pianist, caught off guard by the request, hesitated before his fingers found the keys. The first notes floated into the air, slow and deliberate. Denzel stood there, not smiling, not scanning the crowd, just waiting. From the corner of the room, a tech operator noticed something strange. The audio settings were being adjusted, not by him, but remotely, Someone was preparing for something serious, not slapstick. It was as if the room itself was shifting, realigning. Chase, still at the edge of the stage, folded his arms tighter, a nervous twitch settling into his mouth. Denzel hadn't even sung yet, and somehow, the joke already felt like it was falling apart. Meanwhile, in the control booth above the crowd, the event producer leaned forward, watching the scene with narrowed eyes. She didn't sign off on this. She didn't know Denzel could sing. No one did. And now, there was tension, not just in the room, but behind the scenes. Was this going off script? Had someone missed something critical about Denzel's past? In that silence before the first lyric, Denzel thought about the phone call he'd received 2 weeks earlier. The agent had asked him to decline, warned him that this was likely a setup. "They want you to flinch," he said. "They want the meme, not the moment." Denzel had paused on the line for a long time before answering. Then maybe it's time they see something real. He had known from the start what this was. But instead of dodging the ambush, he'd decided to step right into it. Not with anger. Not with pride. But with purpose. Because this wasn't about a talent show. This was about every time someone had smiled to his face but doubted his depth. Every time they had applauded his work on screen but ignored his story off screen. Every time they had treated him as a symbol, but not as a man. He wasn't there to entertain them. He was there to remind them. And then, at last, he sang. The first line came out slow and soft, full of gravel and fire. Not showy. Not perfect. But raw. Real. "I was born by the river." The crowd's laughter died in their throats. The phones that were held up to mock suddenly lowered, their owners too stunned to hit record. There was no background track, no flashy lighting, no backup singers. Just Denzel and a piano. A man standing in front of a crowd who thought they knew him, peeling back a layer they had never imagined existed. Somewhere in the back, an old director who had once passed on him for a musical role leaned forward in his chair, jaw slack. The host, Chase, stood frozen, unsure whether to joke or run. The song continued. The trap had been set, but not for Denzel. For everyone else. As the first verse slipped into the air, the entire ballroom felt it in their chest. It wasn't the kind of voice trained for perfection, but it didn't need to be. Denzel's voice was weathered, full of soul, deep and trembling with weight. Each word landed like it had been carried for years. The crowd, frozen in place, watched with wide eyes. Some leaned forward, others sat back as if afraid of missing a breath. Every syllable seemed to pull the air out of the room. This wasn't just singing, it was something bigger, something personal, something no one had prepared for. Those who had come to be amused found themselves gripped by something they didn't expect to feel: shame, admiration, maybe even awe. The same people who had smiled smugly were now unable to look away. The pianist, now locked in, matched the tempo of Denzel's emotion, keeping the notes soft but firm. The lights dimmed slightly, not by cue, but as if the moment itself demanded less show, more truth. The camera operators who had set up to catch a viral moment began adjusting their angles. One whispered to another, "We're not filming a joke anymore." The director in the control booth didn't call for any cuts or camera shifts. She just watched, slack-jawed, forgetting for a moment that this was her show. Chase Huxley, who had started the night feeling untouchable, was now pacing just behind the curtain. His earlier grin had melted into something uneasy. He could hear the whispers now, not laughter but questions. How could this be the same man they tried to turn into a punchline? Why hadn't anyone known he could sing like this? It wasn't just the power of the voice, it was the presence. Denzel didn't try to perform. He didn't move his hands or work the crowd. He just stood there, planted like a tree, singing like he was standing in front of his father's pulpit again. And slowly, the audience began to shift. Phones were lowered, hands rested in laps, and breaths were held longer than usual. A few eyes welled with tears without warning. The room, packed with powerful people used to controlling attention, found themselves completely at the mercy of a single man and a song. Midway through the second verse, something extraordinary happened. A woman near the back, a well-known casting agent who had never given Denzel a second look outside of drama roles, stood up. Not to leave. Not to make a scene. She just stood. Her eyes were locked on him. And soon, another stood. Then another. It wasn't a coordinated ovation, it was confusion, emotion, and disbelief manifesting as movement. One person muttered, "This can't be real." And still, Denzel kept singing. His eyes stayed closed. His posture never shifted. He didn't react to the movement in the room. He was somewhere else. Maybe back in that empty church. Maybe remembering the first time his father hummed that tune. Maybe thinking about the years he kept this piece of himself hidden. The crowd didn't matter. The stage didn't matter. It was between him and the song. The energy turned electric. It was no longer just a performance. It was a reckoning. And the tension didn't just come from surprise, it came from regret. Regret for laughing. Regret for doubting. Regret for forgetting that even legends carry silent dreams. The mood in the room flipped from smug to reverent, but it wasn't comfortable. It was humbling. Chase, watching from the side, realized the worst thing that could happen had happened. He wasn't going to be remembered as the host of the night. He was going to be remembered as the guy who tried to turn Denzel Washington into a joke and got buried under the moment he created. He stepped back further, out of the stage light, feeling smaller than he'd ever felt in his career. Meanwhile, in the front row, a young actress gripped her clutch so tight her knuckles turned white. She had always looked up to Denzel for his roles, but now she saw something deeper, a vulnerability that made everything else feel hollow in comparison. By the final chorus, the crowd was silent but no longer passive. The air felt heavy, like something sacred was happening. No one clapped between verses. No one whispered. They were holding on. The talent show had disappeared. The sparkle, the pretense, the politics, gone. What remained was one man, one voice, and a truth too raw to ignore. As he hit the final line, "It's been a long time coming, but I know a change can come," his voice cracked, not from weakness, but from something real. And just like that, the last note faded. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything they didn't say. Full of everything they now saw. And no one could look away. As Denzel held the last note, his voice echoing into silence, time seemed to pause. There was no music now, no applause yet, just a stillness that felt more powerful than thunder. His eyes were still closed, like he was bracing for something. But what came next wasn't laughter or even clapping, it was something more primal. A collective inhale. One person gasped softly. Another dropped their phone into their lap, forgetting they were recording. Then, as if on cue, people started standing, not in a burst, not in some rehearsed standing ovation, but slowly, reverently, like they were rising for something sacred. And just as Denzel opened his eyes, the room gave him what no one expected. Pure silence, followed by a wall of emotion so thick it was almost heavy. But before the claps could fully erupt, a new presence stirred in the back of the room, shifting the moment in a way no one saw coming. Near the entrance, just beyond the final row of tables, a man stepped forward. He wore a dark grey suit, aged but pressed with care. His salt and pepper beard and steady eyes held the weight of someone who had lived many hard years. At first, no one recognized him. But then Denzel did. His posture changed. His face, strong and composed just moments before, cracked just slightly, not with fear or embarrassment, but recognition. The man was Earl Bridges, a name unknown to Hollywood but unforgettable to Denzel. Years ago, when Denzel was still in high school, Earl had been the choir director at a small community church in Harlem. He wasn't famous, but he had been the first man outside of Denzel's family to tell him his voice mattered. He was the one who encouraged him to sing that solo during a community Christmas service. The one who told him, "Don't ever bury that voice, son. It's not yours to waste." Denzel hadn't seen him in over 30 years. Now here he was, standing in the back of a Beverly Hills ballroom full of movie stars, and the weight of his presence hit harder than any applause. Earl took a few steps forward and slowly began clapping. Not fast. Not flashy. But steady. His eyes didn't leave Denzel's. Others around him followed. Then a few more. Then it spread like a wave. A roaring wall of claps rose through the room, people rising not out of obligation, but out of awe. Some had tears streaming down their cheeks. Others looked around, confused by their own emotions. The same people who had laughed at the setup now felt part of something they didn't understand. And yet, even as the applause rose, Denzel didn't smile. He didn't bow. He simply nodded once at Earl. A moment passed between them that no one else could interpret. Chase Huxley, still off to the side, felt the spotlight shift away from him permanently. His joke had turned into a masterpiece, but not by his design. He watched, now irrelevant, as the room that once belonged to him was reclaimed by something real. The entire narrative had flipped. This wasn't a celebrity talent show anymore. It was a reckoning. And for those who had come to mock, the applause now tasted like an apology. Some guests looked embarrassed. Others just stared, trying to understand why they felt humbled. In the front row, a veteran producer leaned over to his assistant and whispered, "That wasn't a performance. That was a confession." No one disagreed. Earl stayed in the back, not needing to move forward, not needing the spotlight. His presence alone had changed the energy. It confirmed something for Denzel, that this wasn't just about proving people wrong. It was about finally showing a piece of himself he'd kept hidden for too long. He didn't need to be a professional singer. That wasn't the point. What mattered was the courage to open a door he had kept closed his entire career. The moment was no longer about talent. It was about truth. And when Denzel stepped off the stage, he didn't head back to his table. He walked straight to the back of the room, to Earl. They didn't hug. They didn't say much. Just a handshake, firm and long. Two men who understood what had just happened. As they stood there, still surrounded by clapping, someone whispered from a nearby table, "He's never done that before. Not like that." Another said, "I didn't know he could sing like that." And somewhere between the murmurs, a quiet question lingered in the air. How many other stories had they overlooked? How many sides of people had they laughed off, assuming they knew the whole picture? That night, the ballroom didn't just witness a song. It witnessed a man unearth a piece of his soul in front of the very people who thought they already knew his worth. And as the lights dimmed and the music faded in again, the only thing louder than the applause was the echo of everything Denzel had just revealed, without saying a single word about it. The ballroom was still humming with energy as Denzel stepped off stage, but it wasn't the same kind of energy the night had started with. It wasn't buzz or gossip or showbiz glitz. It was reverence. Something had cracked open in that room, and no one could put the lid back on. People stood quietly, unsure what to do with their hands or their expressions. Some guests sat down again slowly, while others stayed on their feet, too moved to move. The lights didn't change. No host returned to the microphone. The show, in every way that mattered, was over, even if it technically wasn't. Denzel didn't return to his table. He didn't circle the room for handshakes or praise. He walked calmly to the far edge of the room where the shadows swallowed the noise and found a quiet place near the exit. Earl stood nearby, his arms crossed, watching the crowd more than watching Denzel. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. Back at the center table, Chase Huxley sat like a statue, no punchlines left, his jaw tight with the kind of discomfort that only truth can deliver. His note cards for the next segment, something about celebrity impersonations, now sat useless beside his drink. He knew there was no coming back from what just happened. His entire bit had been undone by sincerity. His career wouldn't end, but his grip on the room had. There were no viral clips ready to be posted for laughs. The only video that mattered now was of a man opening himself up in front of a crowd that didn't expect, or deserve, it. That wasn't the content anyone had prepared for, but it was the one everyone would be sharing by morning. As guests slowly began murmuring to one another, something else happened. People who had never spoken to each other before leaned in, bonded not by industry or connections, but by what they had witnessed. An actor whispered to a producer, "Did you know he could do that?" The producer shook his head. No one did. A woman from a record label tapped her assistant and said, "Get me his contact. Not for a deal. I just want to thank him." And yet, Denzel wasn't seeking gratitude. He hadn't done it to be discovered in a new way. He hadn't sung to be signed. He had sung to say something he could never explain with words. And what made it powerful wasn't how perfect it was, but how unfiltered, how full of grief, joy, regret, pride, all rolled into one voice that didn't ask for approval. By the time the next act awkwardly took the stage, most of the crowd had mentally checked out. They clapped politely, but their minds were still stuck on that moment, that voice, that crack in the armor of a man they thought they already understood. Denzel left quietly, slipping out a side door without telling anyone. There were no goodbyes, no closing remarks. Just a shadow stepping into the night, leaving behind a room that felt different now. And even hours later, as people filed out into the valet area, conversations were quieter, reflective. Some guests rode home in silence. Others talked in soft tones about their own hidden passions, the dreams they'd put away to play the parts life had handed them. He had unlocked something in them, not by demanding it, but by modeling it. The story of the night was no longer about a charity show or celebrity appearances. It was about the moment a man stood in front of 1,000 people and showed them what it meant to own every part of yourself, even the pieces you'd buried to survive. And what lingered was not just admiration. It was the uncomfortable realization that they had misjudged him. That they had laughed before they listened. That they had mistaken silence for absence, stillness for limitation. And in doing so, they had revealed more about themselves than about him. Back inside the ballroom, Chase eventually returned to the MIC, stumbling through a few forced lines before giving up on humor. "Let's keep the night going," he said, voice flatter than usual. But it didn't. The spark was gone. Denzel had taken it with him. Not out of spite, but because truth always burns a little brighter than a spotlight. No one ever called it a comeback or a surprise. The media headlines the next morning didn't know what to do with it. Some tried to frame it as Denzel's secret talent, others as Oscar winner shocks with soulful solo, but those who were in the room knew better. It wasn't about singing. It was about stripping off the image. It was about finally being seen, not for the roles he played, but for the song he carried all his life. And even though he would never speak publicly about it again, that night lived on, not in YouTube clips, not in award speeches, but in the memory of everyone who had walked in expecting a show and walked out having witnessed something else entirely.